You know, the global economy, it just keeps throwing curveballs, doesn't it? And the latest one getting attention is, well, a bit strange. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is actually asking European countries to send eggs over.
Yeah, places like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, the Netherlands, Lithuania.
Right.
And it immediately brings up this tension, this kind of irony, especially when you think about recent trade policy.
Exactly. I mean, we all remember the Trump administration's tariffs, right? That 25% on steel and aluminum imports.
And the threats of doing the same for copper, it definitely set a tone for international trade.
So just to level set for everyone listening, tariffs, basically, they're taxes on stuff brought into the country.
Right, imported goods
The companies doing the importing pay the tax, and, well, often that cost gets passed down the line.
to us, the consumers.
Yeah.
Makes imported things more expensive.
And the whole point, usually, is to help out industries here at home make the foreign competition less appealing price-wise. Okay, so let's get into this. Our mission today is really to dig into tariffs, what they're supposed to do, and what actually, happens, the ripple effects.
And this egg situation, weird as it sounds, is actually a pretty useful way to look at it.
It really highlights how connected everything is, doesn't it? This whole global economy thing.
It really does. And it connects back to the reasons usually given for tariffs in the first place.
Like boosting U.S. manufacturing, protecting jobs.
Exactly. That was the main argument, wasn't it? Revitalize American industry, keep jobs here, grow the economy.
And raise tax revenue, too. That was part of it.
And, of course, tackling the trade imbalance. That was a big one, especially with the EU.
Yeah, they kept mentioning that $213 billion trade deficit with the EU for 2024. That was framed as a major issue.
So you have those goals on one side.
And then on the other, you have the U.S. now actively asking those same European nations for eggs.
It sort of throws those objectives into sharp relief, doesn't it? Shows the potential gap between policy goals and, well, reality.
This is where it gets really fascinating. The reason we suddenly need European eggs, it's actually pretty stark.
Bird flu.
Yeah, a really bad outbreak. It's apparently wiped out millions of chickens, the laying hens.
So a domestic shortage. And prices going up, presumably.
Exactly. A big jump in egg prices. So the irony is just palpable. One minute, the talk is all about protecting U.S. industries from Europe.
And the next, we need their help with a basic food item.
Right. It's not just ironic, though. It shows how, unexpected things can completely flip the script on domestic needs. Trying to isolate completely with tariffs, maybe that's not always workable.
Well, and the reaction in Europe, according to the sources we looked at, they picked up on this.
Oh, yeah.
The term door-to-door begging was apparently flying around on social media.
Wow.
It just captures that surprise, maybe a bit of, oh, well, It really underlines how fragile even basic supply chains can be.
Absolutely. And this whole egg thing, it's happening right as we're talking about potentially new tariffs, specifically that proposed 25% on copper.
Which might not seem as, everyday essential as eggs.
But copper is huge. It's fundamental for so many industries.
It really is. Think about it. Technology relies heavily on copper. Smartphones, EVs, construction.
Renewable energy too, right? Solar panels, wind turbines.
Absolutely critical. So if you mess with the supply or the price of copper, the effects can spread out pretty far and wide.
And we're already seeing the markets reacting. Just the idea of these tariffs seems to be shaking things up.
Yeah, the London Metal Exchange, the LME.
Yeah.
That's a key global price benchmark.
Right.
Copper prices there shot past $10,000 a ton.
Wow. And in New York, the COMEX.
Prices moving up there too. And the gap, the difference between the future prices on LME and COMEX, it hit a record.
How much?
Over $12,254 a ton difference.
That's huge. What does that signal?
Well, it suggests a big divergence in how traders see copper availability.
Yeah.
They seem to expect it to be much tighter, much more expensive in the U.S. compared to Europe going forward.
Yeah.
Likely because they're anticipating these tariffs messing with the usual flow of copper.
Okay, so if these tariffs actually happen, what are the likely impacts? Industries here using copper, they face higher costs.
That's the direct effect, yeah. They'll have to pay more for imported copper. Then they have a choice. Absorb that cost, which hurts their bottom line.
Or pass it on.
Or pass it on to consumers. So higher prices for electronics, cars, construction, you name it.
Which could make U.S. companies less competitive globally, too.
Potentially, yes. And it seems like the market's already trying to get ahead of this.
Oh, so?
We're seeing copper physically moving from LME warehouses outside the U.S. into COMEX warehouses located in the U.S.
Like they're stocking up before the tariff hits.
Seems like it. A rush to build up reserves. But that raises questions about the longer term, doesn't it?
Yeah, like, does this create artificial shortages down the road?
Exactly. Stockpiling helps for a bit, maybe. But if a tariff stays in place and restricts the normal flow of imports,
And if U.S. production can't make up the difference?
then you could see consistently higher prices, yeah? Not because there isn't enough copper in the world, but because of the trade barrier itself.
And this isn't just theory. We've seen this movie before, haven't we? With the steel and aluminum tariffs back in 2018.
We have. And there was that study, I think you mentioned it in the American Economic Review.
Yeah, it looked at the impact. It did find some jobs were created, about 1,800 in washing machine manufacturing. Companies like Samsung who build here.
Right. But you have to look at the cost of those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That's the crucial part. Okay,
Right.
1,800 jobs sounds good on the surface,
Right.
but the wider economic fallout was pretty significant.
Oh, so.
Well, U.S. businesses paid more for steel and aluminum. Supply chains got disrupted.
And then retaliation, right?
Mhm.
China, the EU, they hit back with their own tariffs on U.S. goods.
Exactly. And who ended up footing the bill for the washing machine tariffs?
Consumers, I assume.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
The study estimated Americans paid about $1.5 billion more per year just for washing machines because of those tariffs.
Wow. So if you divide that extra cost by the number of jobs created,
It comes out to over $800,000 per job.
$800,000 per job.
Yeah. It really puts the cost-benefit analysis into perspective, doesn't it? Makes you question if the gains in that one sector were worth the broader economic pain.
And you can definitely see how a similar dynamic could play out with copper. The key takeaway from steel seems to be, yes, maybe some jobs in one area, but potentially huge costs spread across consumers and other industries.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder. Tariffs might seem like they're protecting one industry, but the ripple effects, the wider consequences, can be really far-reaching and often hurt consumers and other parts of the economy more.
All right, let's rewind even further. History has more lessons here. The chicken tax from the 1960s, that's a fascinating one.
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
Mm.
It started because American chicken farmers got really good at producing cheap chicken.
So good they started flooding European markets.
Right, and European farmers, understandably, weren't thrilled. They pushed for tariffs on U.S. chicken.
And the U.S. response? Tit for tat.
Pretty much. The U.S. saw it as unfair and slapped a 25% tariff on light trucks, brandy, potato starch, dextrin, mostly aimed at Germany and France.
Light trucks being the key one for the long run, right, because of Volkswagen.
Exactly. VW was starting to sell their little pickup trucks in the U.S., and that 25% tariff basically killed that market for them overnight.
But the long-term effects, that's where it gets really interesting and kind of illustrates these unintended consequences we're talking about.
Totally. The tax was meant to shield U.S. automakers from these smaller, maybe more fuel-efficient European trucks.
And it worked in the short term. Imported trucks got way more expensive, gave Detroit a pretty clear run in that market segment for decades.
But think about what happens when you remove competition like that. Did it maybe make the U.S. light truck market less innovative over time? Less pressure on pricing?
Possibly. Without serious foreign competition in that specific area, maybe there was less drive to push the envelope technologically or keep prices super competitive.
It's a plausible argument. The lasting lesson from the chicken tax seems to be how protectionism, even with good intentions maybe, can end up creating markets that are less dynamic, less innovative, and ultimately worse for consumers in the long haul.
And didn't you mention some weird loopholes people found?
Oh yeah, this is the bizarre part. To get around that huge 25% tariff, some foreign automakers actually started shipping trucks incomplete.
Like how?
Sometimes just the cab and the chassis, classifying them as passenger vehicles, which had a much lower tariff. Then they'd build a truck bed on after it arrived in the U.S.
Seriously, that sounds incredibly inefficient.
Totally inefficient, but cheaper than paying the 25% tax. It's a perfect example of how markets try to find ways around these kinds of interventions, in really convoluted ways.
So the end result of the chicken tax was this whole segment of the U.S. auto market being shaped not really by what consumers wanted or normal competition, but by this decades-old tariff.
Yeah, higher costs, inefficiencies, a distorted market, pretty much.
So bringing it all together, these historical examples, the steel tariffs, the chicken tax, and then looking at the current situation with eggs and potential copper tariffs, this central tension keeps coming up, doesn't it?
It really does. Tariffs sound like this simple tool, protect our industries.
Right. Straightforward protection.
But the reality is almost always way more complicated. You get these cascades of effects, often unforeseen and frequently negative overall.
And the contradiction right now is just striking. The U.S. government asking Europe for help with eggs.
While at the same time considering new tariffs that would block other important goods coming in.
It just really hammers home how tangled up everything is globally. You can't just wall off one part of your economy from the rest of the world, can you?
Doesn't seem like it. We're too interconnected, for better or worse.
It definitely leaves you thinking. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe here's something to chew on. In this incredibly connected global economy, where supply chains crisscross everywhere and nations rely on each other for so much, are tariffs actually an effective long-term strategy? Or do they end up being, more often than not, kind of a self-inflicted wound, creating these hidden costs, these distortions that maybe, just maybe, outweigh any benefits you thought you were getting? It's worth thinking about the real price, the often unseen price behind these policies.